Hello, everybody. My name's John Yates. We're so glad you're here. We're so glad to be with you on the screen tonight, wherever you are watching this. We're going to have a good time. This is a panel on how to run with endurance in the ministry. And just following our panel, there's going to be a short talk by Michael Horton. And then following Michael Horton, there will be a second keynote talk by Julius Kim. So we got a lot to look forward to tonight. We're going to have a good time. I don't know if you know all of these men. There's Matt Carter down there on the end. Matt is at Sagemont Church in Houston, Texas. He was the pastor of Austin Stone Community Church in Austin, Texas, up until just 1 year ago. So he's been through some major changes in the last year. And then Vermon Pierre is from Phoenix, Arizona. For 16 years, Vermon has been the leader of Roosevelt Community Church. And Afshin Ziafat is the lead pastor of Providence Church in Frisco, Texas. He's been there about 11 years now, I think. And Afshin's a little different from the rest of us. His native land is Iran. And when he converted to Christ, that caused terrible difficulties in his family. And I don't know if we'll hear anything about that tonight. But we said before we came in, this is just going to be sort of like we're sitting around Vermon's family room talking tonight about the ministry and the challenges that make it hard sometimes to endure. Each of us have had different stories, but we're all married with families, and we've all carried huge responsibilities in church ministry in our individual callings. We're really glad to have this opportunity to talk with you all. I actually am from Virginia. I have been a pastor for over 50 years, and I just stepped aside a couple of years ago. So, hallelujah. Thank you. So we're here to talk about the challenge of maintaining vitality and joy and effectiveness in the ministry over the long haul. And so we want to consider with you how to run with endurance the race that God calls us to in ministry. I'm guessing, in fact, I know that each one of us have had down times over the years when we've been tempted to quit. And so we want to talk about endurance in the ministry, both objectively, but also just personally as well. We're not here necessarily because we're experts in how to persevere in the ministry, but just because we've got a lot of experience and we've learned some lessons that we hope will be helpful to you. Hope to inform you and warn you and encourage you and instruct you from our experience. So this session is for people in ministry, not just for pastors, but for anybody who is seeking to serve Christ effectively wherever you are. But because we are all pastors, that's kind of the context in which we will address this question. You know, there's been a lot of studies done, you've probably read some, about how hard it is for pastors to stay in the ministry. And I'm suspicious of statistics about pastors dropping out of the ministry. But we all know that happens, and it happens frequently. And I've just got one quote, the only quote I'm going to read to you all night, about challenges of the ministry, because I laughed out loud when I read it. It's written by a Michigan State University professor who did a study a few years ago on challenges of pastoral ministry. Let me read to you what he says. He says, the breadth of tasks performed by local church pastors, coupled with the rapid switching between task clusters and roles in this position is unique. I've never encountered such a fast-paced job with such varied and impactful responsibilities. This is the quote I like, performing all the different tasks required of most local church pastors would require 64 different personal competencies. It's almost inconceivable to imagine that a single person could be uniformly high on the 64 distinct knowledge, skills, and abilities and personal characteristics. So if you thought you were tired, that's why. So I want to just throw out to my friends here, if you have indeed had times in your ministry when you were so tired or frustrated that you felt like you wanted to quit or came near quitting, just tell us what it's like. Or and maybe an easier way to get into this is to say, what in your experience are some of the reasons that cause us to want to quit? I wanted to quit many times during the ministry, many times. And every time I went to the Lord and I said, Lord, can I leave now? He said, permission denied, son. Remain in place.
That's good.
So I did. I'm glad I did.
Your story.
What do you think are some of the reasons, guys, Ramon, what do you think are some of the reasons why?
I think for a lot of people, it's just that feeling of being sort of overburdened, feeling as if you sort of carry the whole weight of the church on you, and that success of the church in almost any area, the success of not just Sunday morning, but the children's ministry, the nursery, everything sort of depends on you, and you find yourself sort of just constantly running, trying to keep everything going, trying to keep everything in place. And that can be true whether the church is doing well or it's not doing so well. You just sort of have this sense of it all falls on me, and if I mess up just a little bit, it's all going to fall apart. It gets to the point, I know this happened with me, where I called it, I'm grinding, right? I'm just sort of going through the motions, getting through each week, and there's no joy there anymore. It's just, you're just doing sort of the same type of things each day of the week to get through into the next week. And you begin to ask yourself, so what's going on? Like, is this really what I wanted to be doing? It's not what I wanted to be doing. I didn't get into this to be doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many things we could talk about in terms of why people in ministry struggle or want to quit. Obviously, burden, the weight, criticism that comes our way. This past year I feel like we all, I'm sure, have gone through. I feel like on every issue, be it, politics or racial unrest or, pandemic, masks. I mean, we've been critiqued like crazy. But man, I really think that there's something really on a foundational level is really settling, or maybe I should say not being settled in what your identity is in and where your identity is rooted. I think that's the main thing that goes off. And for me, I've been pastoring for 10 to 11 years, but before that I was traveling and preaching. And, coming from a Muslim background and becoming a Christian, I had this testimony that, was really powerful of what God did in my life. And so it afforded me opportunities to speak at different conferences and everything. And doors were being opened. And slowly but surely, I feel like the Lord was allowing me to go into a place of just dryness. And I remember sitting in my bed one night and just wondering, where's the joy I had when I had become a Christian? Being able to, by God's strength, walk away from my father and my family because Jesus was enough for me. And not being able to sleep at night, literally at a youth camp, because I couldn't believe that God would love me. Like, that joy's gone. And I feel like the Lord was telling me, Afshin, you used to love me for who I am, but now you love me for what I give you, what opportunities. And I went to a scripture. This is in the middle of a 10-day period where I was just getting away, fasting, and just seeking the Lord, going, what's wrong? And in the middle of this, God led me to a passage in Exodus where Moses leads the people out of Egypt and is heading to the promised land. Of course, they build the golden calf, and God says, look, you take your people. It's the first time he calls them your people. You take your people into the land, but I'm not going to go in your midst. And I read that, and I felt like God was saying, Afshin, you can have all this stuff, but I'm not going to be in it. And I remember just going, God, if I don't have you, don't give me another ministry opportunity. I mean, who cares? This is about you, and I want to know you. I want to worship you, follow you. And right after that, if you keep reading, Moses does essentially the same thing. If you don't go with us, don't take us into the land. In other words, don't give us the land. The greatest thing about our lives, men and women, is that we can know God and be known by him. When the 70 returned to Jesus after he sent them out in Luke, they say, man, even the demons are subject to us in your name, Jesus. And Jesus eventually says, don't rejoice that the spirits are subject to you, but rejoice that your name is written in heaven. So where is your joy rooted in? Is it rooted in your ministry, or is it rooted in your identity and your being a child of God? And so for me, I had to get to that point where I said, God, if you don't go with me, I don't want ministry. And so that was early in my ministry, but I think it was a moment that I had to go through to really put the flag in the ground that if the ministry goes away, I don't care, because what I need most is Jesus. So
you mentioned Moses. I've been reading Moses lately. My wife and I have both been reading, and there's so much about Moses that you identify with in the ministry, because all of his problems had to do with the people. He if it hadn't been for the people, it would have been great. And you know, it's the people in the church who make the ministry so hard. And every minister worth his salt has said to his secretary or somebody, God, if it just wasn't for the people around here, I think I would really love this work. But people let you down. Yeah. And people jump on you and criticize you, especially this last year. And there's a lot of nagging. And the other thing about our people is we have the responsibility to walk with people through the most difficult moments of life. It's a great privilege, but it's a huge weight and responsibility on us to have to deal with the tragedies that we face. And we don't always have the answers. And you come to the end of your own resources very quickly in the ministry. I don't know, Matt, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, for me, it's been physical, emotional, spiritual fatigue, and criticism have been the two things that have been the most significant for me. Tell a quick story. I was, I think it was one of these conferences, and was walking outside, and I saw Matt Chandler, and Matt and I know each other from Texas, and we just talk like you do in conferences, and he was telling me this story. He said, Matt, I am worn out. And the example that he gave, this was years ago, he said, I'm preaching 4 services a Sunday, and he said, the other day, I got done with the 4th service. I went and I got in my car, I put my hands on the steering wheel, and I just started weeping. And what went through my mind is, man, what a wimp, you know? What kind of person cries just because you're preaching a lot, you know? Well, my church in Austin started growing, and we were up to 4 services at one point, and I think I preached 13 or 14 Sundays in a row doing 4 services, and I distinctly remember getting done with the 4th service and getting in my car, and just for no reason, I just started losing it. And I think you're right, whatever those 63 things that we must be competent on, they wear us completely out. And then criticism, and as you know, we talked about it, I just moved churches. I was the founding pastor of the Austin Stone, was there for 18 years. And then for some crazy reason, I took a job in Houston at an established church that had been there for 53 years, and I was the 2nd pastor in their history. And I've gotten more negative emails in the last year than I probably have in the last 15 at my previous church. And it hit me one day. I got a nasty email, and it hit me that this person that's writing this email doesn't really realize how the accumulative effect of multiple negative things that come into your life. And we carry a lot of that as pastors, and it just wears you down.
Amen.
And, you know, on criticism, one of the things, and by the way, that's why I firmly believe in our model of church, which I believe is the biblical model, and that's to be elder-led, and we have a plurality of elders. We have 6 elders. So I never feel like I carry the criticism or the complaints or whatever on my own shoulder, just by myself, and that's been so huge for me to have that. But you know, one of the things we as elders, a verse in 2 Corinthians 1 where Paul says that the testimony of my boasting is my conscience, and I'm butchering it now, but he basically says that I behaved with godly sincerity and simplicity. And one of the things that allowed us this past year, again, from both sides, getting hit on every subject with emails, being able to put our head down on our pillow at night, just to say, at the end of the day, we know that, because what's been hard about leadership this year is, man, it's easy to choose right over wrong. But we've had to make, and all of us have, we have to make decisions when there is no clear right answer, and that's real hard,
That for
right?
me, you just articulated for me what was the most difficult part about it, is whatever decision I made in regards to mass, social distancing, you knew you were upsetting somebody. And it's not always that way.
That's when there's no right answer. And by the way, to not make a decision is to make a decision, right? Or to wait is to make a decision. So, but I knew that I could put my head down on my pillow at night in peace, because before God, we sought the Lord, we sought the counsel of the Word, we sought counsel of other brothers that we trust, and we made a collective decision that we thought was the best decision. And so that I can sincerely tell people that we did what was in the best interest for you and was the most God-honoring. So I think that, I don't know if that's helpful for you, but as you walk through criticism, to lean on that verse.
Yeah. Ramon, did you ever think seriously about walking away from the ministry?
We started Roosevelt Church in 2005, and for the first 11 years of the church, things are great. Like, we had no real, the usual church growing problems, but I remember a couple years in, and I regret thinking this. I thought, man, I've heard every church goes through hard seasons. Maybe we're just one of those churches that won't have that happen. and then 2016 happened, and we're a multi-ethnic, diverse church, and so the first half of the year, my associate pastor, significant moral failure. He was sort of the most influential leader in our church besides me, and we ended up having to let him go, and so that was hugely disruptive to the church. It was like the first time something that significant had happened. And so people were sort of upset by that, certainly people who had been discipled by him and followed him. So that was disruptive. And then the election happens. And for a church like us, that was a huge issue. It was something that we as an elder team decided we will address this. And we were upfront in saying we think there are issues here that are worth us addressing. We think the church is the place that it should be addressed, and that we have a gospel that's able to address these type of issues, that there are racial issues in our country for us to talk about and deal with. And so, I sort of made this assumption that, I've been pastoring a church, for all these years, there's people in the church who remember back when we were setting up chairs and all that kind of stuff. Like, they'd give me the benefit of the doubt, they'd walk with me and follow my lead as we sort of said, hey, we're going to press into these things. And to see that not happen, and to see, and it wasn't the majority of the church. I think that's the thing about the criticism was, it's not, a lot of times I'm like, it's not, I can almost think through a number of the people who were having the biggest issues. I think the thing that hurts is that it's sort of this group of people who are vocal and include some people that you thought you were close with. Some people, the brother I walked with, right? And to see them sort of turn and to sort of go right into mistrust and doubt, to see people accuse you of things that were just wrong, just like flat out lies, slander, really. And to see them sort of double down on those things, to see, even after he had a conversation with people about, hey, here's what we're doing, and you'd think that they got it, but then to realize no, they didn't agree, and they're gonna be even more disruptive within the life of the church and tell other people. So all that was happening. We were doing a number of different things in the end of 2016, sort of different roundtables and other things, and as a way of sort of helping us think through these issues. But some people said, we don't want to be in a church that talks about these things, which again was hurtful. And as that happened, and especially as I was getting, as people began to leave, about maybe a third of the church left in 2016. And basically particularly, somewhat related to the issue with the associate pastor, but then even more so with us dealing with issues of race. To see people leave, and I need to do a breakout session on how to leave a church well, because it was like they wanted to burn the bridge down everywhere around them. And so this rude emails and all these other things said about me, my wife, I remember thinking, what am I doing? I don't need to do this. I've got like a good degree from a good college. I got, there's other things I could be doing besides this. Like I don't want to keep having this happen. I don't think I ever started looking for other jobs and job searches and things like that. But I was actively thinking, like, this can't continue. I can't keep doing this. This isn't worth it. And that was hard. It was a hard season. And I think, I'll just give sort of I think what got me through this was a really strong elder team. And I think you can't get through seasons like that. You can't endure a ministry without a good elder team, a good staff around you. And so their willingness to say, hey, Vermon, we believe in what you're doing, and we support it. And not to say we were agreeing on every little thing, but just a sense of, hey, we're gonna walk through this together. And then they encouraged me to take time off. And I was like, this is not a season for me to take time off. Their encouragement for me to do that just gave me clarity, reminded me why I was doing this, reminded me of my love for Christ, and how that was true. It almost freed me from saying I had to have my whole identity wrapped up in the church. I don't, you don't. The church will continue past you, right? It will continue, until the Lord tarries for generations past you. What you have is your faith in the Lord, and that matters above all else. And that freed me from a lot of the things that I was struggling with.
Yeah.
What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I came real close to quitting the ministry 3 years ago. And, you asked me to share the short version of the story. I will. I was at a significant season of fatigue. I would say burnout. I never really understood what that meant. I think I was there. It was definitely leading out of my, not really out of an overflow of my walk with Jesus at that time. And it was really for the first time in my life, there's a big backstory, but I was seriously contemplating leaving the ministry. I was so tired, so frustrated. And a friend of mine that is, he's literally a billionaire. He called me one day, he said, Matt, why don't you come hang out with me? Went to his ranch, we're hanging out. And, I've been praying, like, God, do you care if I leave? Do you want me to leave? Whatever. So we go hang out at his ranch, and he said, Matt, I've been thinking about it, and I would like for you to come to work for me at my company and be kind of the head chaplain over the entire corporation, which is massive. He said, I'd like to pay you $1.2 million a year. And I was like, I hear you, Lord. Yeah, like, thank you, God, clearly speaking to me today. I had, a couple of days before, I'd had a little spot off my ear removed, a little mole. True story, we're in the middle of the conversation, phone rings, it's the dermatologist, it was melanoma. So I had to look at him, I said, man, I've got to go. I left and went and dealt with that. It was real early stage, we caught it early. Short time after that, it's another really long story, but got a call from the FBI and they came and picked me up. I'm like, what's going on? And there was this credible threat on my life that the FBI had found and stopped before they carried it out. It was significant, it was real. The guy came really close to pulling it off. It involved my family. And that shook me up. And so at that point, I'm confirmed. I'm like, I'm done. I really think I'm gonna leave. So I call the guy again, and I'm asking more questions about the job. And I was literally on the phone with him again. And my phone rings, and it's my son. And my son never calls because he's in college. And I said, man, let me take this. I get it, my son was in a horrible car accident. And we didn't know. He's like, I think I'm okay. I'm not sure. The car's totaled. They're taking me in the ambulance. Bye. So anyway, completely wrecked me out. I'm driving as fast as I can to the ambulance, or to the hospital. First and only time in my life I've ever yelled at God. And I was like, God, what in the world are you doing? You know, I've got melanoma. This guy's trying to take my life. My son, I'm like, if you got to kill somebody, God, kill me. And anyway, long story short, I was supposed to preach that Sunday. I called one of the other pastors and said, I can't do it. I just don't have it in me. Had no idea what he was going to preach on. Made myself go to church that Sunday. And I walk in there and sit on the front row. He's preaching on Jonah. And he gets to that text, which talks about the Lord hurled storms at Jonah to get him to go and fulfill the calling on his life. And he's preaching. guy named Ross Lister. And then Ross, just in the middle of it, sort of stops. And he says, you know, I don't think I've ever done this before, but I feel extremely compelled right now by the Holy Spirit to say this. And then he turns to the congregation and said, if there's anyone here that is running from the call of God on their lives and the Lord is hurling storms at you, would you stand up? And I stood up on the front row of my church, bawling like a baby. And I made the decision right then and there that I'm not going to leave this calling unless God calls me out of it. But I'm not going to do it for another reason. And ever since then, if anybody ever suggests anything, I'm like, I'm not leaving the ministry, man. I'm out. I'm good.
Well, that's a really dramatic story. I appreciate your sharing that with us. You know, does it surprise you that some of the really outstanding pastors in the country have faced this temptation to leave the ministry? It doesn't surprise me. I think that there are things to be aware of in your own spirit that can alert you that you're getting worn down, you're getting worn out. Irritableness, a lack of love for people. When you find you just can't handle one more person. Or I think a couple of you mentioned loss of joy in the ministry. Maybe you get angry frequently or depressed. Or I think sometimes we go through periods when we lose our vision. We don't have any vision. We don't really know where we're going or what we're doing. That's very discouraging. It's easy to get so exhausted that you get down on yourself. I should be able to do better. What's wrong with me? When there are more bad days than good days. These are all signs to be aware of. You know, we're focused on the book of Hebrews in this conference, and there's a great verse that I'd like us to take a few minutes to just consider together from Hebrews 12, verses 1 to 3. And I'm sure we're going to hear a great message on this before the week's over. But listen to this. We'll talk about it a bit. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. So that you will not grow weary and lose heart. There are 3 or 4 points here in this passage that I'd just like to think about a minute. First of all, he says, being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. I don't think this is just referring to all the saints who've gone before us and who've died, although that's very important. But it's also important to have heroes, to have mentors, to have cheerleaders and encouragers who've modeled healthy ministry and who are in your life, who are encouraging you. I don't know if any of you all want to speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the church that I pastor was planted out of the village church, actually, in 2005. And there was a pastor, the founding pastor was there 5 years, and had a lot of struggles in his life, and was actually asked to step down. And he actually ended up overdosing and passing away. It was a very tragic thing, and great preacher, loved Jesus and loved his family, wonderful family, and so then obviously the Lord called me there, and once I got there, I started hearing stories about him, and it did I kept hearing how removed I felt like he was from a lot of the people in the church that didn't really actually know him well. And so back to being surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, obviously that's referring to the Hebrews 11, the Hall of Faith, these examples that we have. But I think a pastor does need to be surrounded by people who know him, who love him, who can speak truth and honesty, to him. And, I've heard pastors sometimes say, man, I just can't have a friend in my church. And I'm just like, what? I think that's one of the most dangerous things, folks. If you feel like you can't have friends inside your church, that's very dangerous. And so for me, the elders, my wife and I, so we were supposed to have a sabbatical that last year, 3-month sabbatical, COVID blew it up. And so after 10 years, I was going to take a sabbatical, and so we didn't get our rest. And man, it's been a very difficult year with everything going on. And man, my marriage, we're doing great, but we got 3 kids, and and there was a moment where I just really felt like, man, the enemy's on the attack. And so literally being able to raise my hand and text the elders and say, I need you guys to pray for me. I need to focus on my marriage. So I just told our executive pastor to take care of staff meeting and for me to go and meet with Tim Harkins, a guy on our staff who's a care guy, and really but to be able to do that freely. And I just think we have blind spots. And if you don't have people in your life very close who can watch and see, like you mentioned, there's irritability, or man, you don't have love for people like you used to, because you don't sense it sometimes, and you need those folks around you to be able to see it and to be able to speak honestly to you. Yeah.
I also think it's helpful to have relationships outside the church. And so having friendships within the church, but then, taking advantage of conferences like this to meet other pastors. This is a unique opportunity to meet other pastors in your area that you can connect with. And so, I've had great opportunities to chat with pastors through Gospel Coalition. There's another network that we're part of called the Surge Network that's local to Phoenix, or local to Arizona, I should say. And just the ability to, especially this past year, to say, hey, how are you handling this issue? And someone, people are saying this in my church. And to be like, oh, well, that's the thing's happening to me. How are you dealing with that? How are you feeling about that? In some ways, it's a good place to be able to just unburden yourself. Sometimes it's just ability to share and someone to be able to say, oh yeah, me too, is hugely helpful. And to have, especially then older pastors that you're networked with, who can say, hey, I went through it, right, in the 60s or the 70s or whatever it is, and here's how I got through it. Here's how you can also get through it, is hugely helpful and encouraging.
I think there's 2 things that I try to remind myself to make sure that I have with people in my life, specifically some men, is I think we need, for those folks around us, I think you need to give them permission to speak in your life. And I think at the same time, they've got to have proximity to your life. And so those 2 things are key, permission and proximity. Because a lot of times you're close to men around you, you're close to your staff, you're close to your elders. But pastors don't give them permission to speak into their life when they see weaknesses, to check on them spiritually, emotionally, physically. And so they're close to them, they have proximity, but they've never given permission to speak into their character. And then there's some situations where guys have given other pastors permission to speak in their life, but they don't have the proximity. I'll give you an example. I'm very good friends with Darren Patrick, who lost his life and lost his ministry a few years before that. I loved him. We were like brothers. And Darren had given me permission to speak into his life on any issue, to challenge him on anything. But we were 20 hours away from each other. Yeah. We didn't have that proximity. Yeah. And yet the men in his life, that he had proximity with, he'd never given that permission. So I think permission and proximity.
Yeah, because you've got David, think of David, who literally sees a woman bathing and asks who she is. And they say, well, that's Uriah's wife. And then he calls for her. You know what I mean? And no one goes, did you hear me? It's not your wife, it's someone else's wife. And no one had the permission to say, no, you're not going there. Even though they were right around him, right? And so that's a good word, that you have to have both of those. One of my favorite verses is in 1 John, where it says, if we walk in the light as he is in the light, we have fellowship with one another. But what kind of fellowship? The very next verse says, if we say we do not sin, we lie and the truth is not in us. Yeah. So it's not a fellowship where you are around people, but no one really knows what's going on. But it's a fellowship where you're confessing sin. And man, that's, again, we all know that's the hard part of being a pastor, is we feel like, wrongly, that we have to somehow hide our sin from our people. And I think if you get in that position, that's exactly where the enemy wants you to be, to take you out. And you have to be able to have a group of men in your life who you can say, hey, you need to know I've messed up. I'm walking down the wrong road. If you say you do not sin, you lie, and the truth is not in us. Yeah.
That passage goes on to talk about, in verse 1, running the race marked out for you. Run the race marked out for us. Guys, how important is it to know, to be deeply assured in your heart that you have been called by God to this particular ministry?
I think it's, sorry if I'm jumping right back in, but I think it's huge. So for me, when my father disowned me when I became a Christian, because my dad's a Muslim, and my relationship with him was restored, but only on a provisional basis, as long as I would go and be a doctor and make him proud of me. And that was the plan. I was going to go to med school, and God called me into ministry, and I was running from it until actually a guy came and preached very similarly on Jonah and pointed me out and said, it's like Afshin over there. He's going to stop running from God to go into ministry. And I was like, okay, I got it. So I told my dad, and he called it, I said, you know how much I want you to be proud of me, Dad, but I'm going to ministry. He said, not only will I never be proud of you, but I'll always be ashamed of you as long as I live. And it's the hardest thing, words to hear from your father. But I was headed up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to go to seminary, and I have never felt the peace of God all over me like on that trip up I-45. And people say, man, I don't have a peace yet, so I'm not going to make the decision. For me, it's actually been, the decision's always been really gut-wrenching, but it's after I make the decision that the peace floods in. And for me, when criticism, or when, man, what am I doing? Why am I walking away? My whole family thinks I'm ridiculous. There's been several times I'm like, am I doing the right thing, God? Because for 30-something years, my dad just passed away this past summer. I had an estranged relationship with my dad. And how many times did the enemy go, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Go back to your dad. But what just kept me going was to remember that drive up I-45 and remember that God's peace was all over me, affirming that call. Yeah, I think it's important.
I had a fairly dramatic call to the ministry. It's something that I can't deny, that the Lord called me. And I can't tell you how many times I've gone back to that. Yeah. Remember that moment when he called me. There's a song came out years and years ago in the early 90s by the Newsboys, and it's a song sung from the perspective of Peter, and he's in jail. He's about to die for the sake of Christ, and he looks out the window of the jail, and rain starts falling, and the line of the song says, water still reminds me of the seaside where our eyes first met. And the idea is that he's about to give his life for Christ, and he remembers the moment where his eyes met Jesus' eyes for the very first time. And I can't tell you how many times when I've wanted to quit, I go back to the beach, I go back to the seaside where my eyes first met his, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it wasn't about money, it wasn't about anything, it was about following him no matter what. And that calling has anchored me more times than I can count.
We've only got about 5 minutes left, and I don't want to miss this one. That passage goes on to say, throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. And I just want to ask this question, brothers. How have you learned to recognize attitudes or habits that hinder your own well-being in the ministry? And, or what are sins we can easily fall into? What hindrances do you see that are common for us to fall into? And maybe how can we avoid them?
Well, for me, it's the degree in which I think I take on the attributes of God in my ministry, and thinking that I need to sort of do things that only the Lord can do. And really it was Zach Eswine's book, Sensing Jesus, and also Imperfect Pastor. I think that really helped me sort of realize this about myself, was just sort of this idea that almost I have to be everywhere, I have to be omnipresent, I've got to be omnipotent, I've got to have control and authority over everything, I've got to be omniscient. Certainly this last year I got to know something about everything, right? And I began to realize I'm occupying a place that's not working. I mean, only God is really good at being God, right? I'm not good at doing it. And I don't have to know everything, right? I don't have to be everywhere. I can admit when I'm wrong. I think all those things, just identifying those things clearly in myself and then beginning to realize the degree in which I was moving those directions was helpful. And because when I move in those directions, that thing then leads to all the other things that we're talking about. That's when I feel tired, exhausted. I'm doing the things that I humanly can't do because I'm human. And I want God to be God, and I just want to be pointing people to Him and hopefully fulfilling the role that God has called me to.
I think we all have blind spots. And for me, it goes back to that permission, is being able to speak and to give permission to the men in my life to say, hey, I have blind spots, you have blind spots. I want you to let me know if you see issues in my character and see issues in my leadership that I may not be aware of. And I've done that, and it's not been easy because my elders have taken me up on it over the years and have sat me down and said, man, when you do this, this is how people receive it. Man, you're doing this. Do you realize you're doing that? And those are difficult conversations to have. But I believe I'm a better leader and a better follower of Christ today because I gave those guys the permission to speak into that. A lot of guys don't. And so they spend their whole careers in the same ruts that they've always been in.
You got to learn to listen. You got to learn to listen to your wife when she tells you something you don't want to hear. You've got to learn to listen to your critics. They're not always right. You've got to learn to listen to your staff. You got to learn to listen to yourself. And when you get away and you're self-reflecting on how things are going in your life and you see errors you've made or habits that you've developed that are not good, and you realize you got to make changes, well, make those changes. Don't just think about it. Make those changes that you've got to make with God's help. Listen to God. Well, there's a lot more that we wish we had time to talk to you about tonight. But I trust this has been helpful as we've tried to speak openly and honestly to you.
John, can I say one more
Yeah.
thing? So I think, looking back to that calling again and remembering, but then looking forward to not only the ultimate, which is being face-to-face with Jesus and hearing, well done, good and faithful servant. Like, that's what motivates me to keep going every day, to endure. But also, before eternity, being on my deathbed and hopefully seeing my children following Jesus and my wife loving Jesus, and at that moment you're just not going to care about anything else. I think all the criticism, and so for me, a guy named Neil Jeffrey, who I really look up to, was huge in my life. And he said every time he pulls into his driveway when he leaves work, he stops and he says a prayer, and he says, God, and he just captures this, I'm about to walk in to the greatest ministry of my life. And he has to pray and set his mind to that before he walks in. And that's stuck with me, and I try to do that every time I pull in, because at the end of the day, that's what matters the most. So,
one thing we haven't said is we all believe in the importance of ministering as a part of a team and not trying to do everything yourself. We got a great new book that's just come out called The Plurality Principle. The Plurality Principle, and it's based on the idea of encouraging us and helping us know better how to develop ministry teams in our churches. Well, I want to pray for you all, and then we're going to move on to the next thing. Dear Lord, I thank you for these men and women of God who are seeking to serve you and to know you. I thank you that you call us into the work of making disciples and leading and guiding your people. I pray for refreshment upon these men and women encouragement, and a great clear sense of calling that never deserts them. We ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.